Hi everybody and welcome back to Caxton House Kitchen. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Diane.
And today we're going to go all Italian. I'm going to be making a sage and butternut squash risotto.
And I'm going to make some biscottis, which are twice baked biscuits. They often contain different ingredients, but today we're going to do them with nuts. And you might have seen them in coffee shops, these tiny little delicate pieces that you have with the coffee. They're absolutely delicious.
Yeah, lovely. So for the risotto, today's ingredients are going to be a butternut squash, and I'm going to show you how to prepare this ready for the risotto. Also some sage, and you can get this in any supermarket. We've actually got ours from the Caxton House Kitchen Garden, so some fresh sage, some shallots. We've got two shallots here, so you can get those again from the supermarket, or just any onion actually will work. But we've got shallots today. Some risotto rice, and again you can get this from most supermarkets. It's a kind of sort of, I don't know, like a pearly sort of like sized rice. It's not long grain, so it's quite pearly and quite condensed. So pack of that from the supermarket. Then some Parmesan cheese or Parmesan cheese, and you can get this ready grated in the supermarket, or you can buy a block of it as well in the supermarket and finely grate it. So whichever preference. You can use any cheese actually at the end of the day, but this is the authentic Italian one. It's a little bit more expensive, but it really does add a different sort of like a real authentic taste to the risotto. We'll also need some bouillon or stock cube or a stock pot as well to make the stock that will feed the risotto. And then just salt and pepper to taste. Okay, so preparing your butternut squash for your risotto, it can be quite daunting to some people, this vegetable, because it looks kind of strange, but it's quite easy to prepare. The equipment you're going to need a fairly large knife or a cutting knife. You're going to need a peeler to peel the butternut squash, and you're going to need a spoon to scoop out the seeds in the butternut squash. So the first process is taking off the end. So be very careful with your fingers when you're doing this, and it's always good to have a little bowl at the side just to put in your debris. Then take off the other end of the butternut squash and discard that. And then you want to cut the butternut squash in half. So you've got two pieces of butternut squash. Now the bottom part of the butternut squash will have the seeds inside it. So what you want to do is take your knife again, lay it on the top, fingers out of the way, and chop it in half again. And you can see there all the seeds inside the butternut squash. Now these seeds are really tasty as well. These can be cooked in the oven when you're roasting your butternut squash. So I'll show you how to do that in a little while. But first, just scoop out your seeds into a spare bowl. And then I'll show you how to prepare these. And it takes a little bit of time to get it out. You can pull it out with your hands as well, or you can use a knife and cut them out. But get all those seeds out and put them in the bowl, and the other half as well. So scoop away. And these seeds are really nice. They're a little bit like sunflower seeds when they're roasted, and they're lovely. You can actually put them on salads, or you can eat them as little snacks. It's almost like a little treat inside your butternut squash. Okay, next I'm going to show you how to peel the butternut squash and then prepare it ready for the risotto. Okay, so the next step is to peel your butternut squash. So I'm just going to show you quickly here. So this is one I've already peeled, but basically you want your half of butternut squash that you've just cut in half. Take your peeler and just run it down butternut squash in the same direction. And you can kind of keep turning it around. Ooh. So just take your time doing it. Small peeling. Make sure your hands are out of the way when you're doing it. And as you're taking the skin off, you can see the bright orange butternut squash flesh underneath. That's what you want to kind of see. So you want to kind of peel it so you're right down to the kind of very orangey part of the butternut squash. So once you peel that half, your other half that you've cut off, you can then chop that in half. And then you can begin to peel this again, just the same way. So running the peeler down the butternut squash. Just like that, but just making sure that your hands are out of the way. Okay, so now we've completely peeled the butternut squash and we've removed all the seeds. The next job is to cube the butternut squash flesh. So the best way to do this is to take your knife and then just slice through the butternut squash that's on the flat part of the table. So, and this can sometimes stick a little bit, but just persevere and just kind of like ease it off. It's all the way through. So you're getting all these individual sort of wedges or slices. Then you can layer up 3 pieces of butternut squash and then half them again and again. So you're cutting that into 3. So you're almost like getting chips. And then keep them all together. And then you can just slice through the butternut squash chips. And then that'll cube the butternut squash. So once you've cubed it, you can then start putting your cubes onto a baking tray. So just carry on doing that with the whole of the rest of the butternut squash. Okay, so I've cubed up all my butternut squash. So the next step is to take some olive oil and then just drizzle that over the top. And you can be quite liberal with it, but not too, not too much, just enough to coat the butternut squash, and then it's getting your hands in there and completely coating the butternut squash so it's completely covered in the oil. And it's usually good to have a tea towel to help you out at this point. So wipe your hands and get your baking tray, and you can put the butternut squash out there, scoop it all out, and then give that. You need to kind of like lay it out so, it's not sort of like layered up too much. It needs to be kind of like flat on the baking tray. Then you can season, so take some pepper. I've got some nice freshly grinding pepper here. And then you can take a little bit of salt as well, and you can just season that, just a little pinch of salt. I've got 2 trays today because it was quite a large butternut squash. So again, I can do the same to this. I mean, alternatively, you can drizzle the oil over the butternut squash when it's in the tray. And then repeat that whole process again so you can kind of move it around and coat it. Okay, so I've preheated the oven to 180 degrees Celsius. I'm now going to put the butternut squash into the oven. Put both of these guys in there. I'll probably cook them for around about 25 to 30 minutes. Halfway through, it's a good idea to take them out and get yourself a spatula and just kind of like turn them around as well, so each side is getting covered and each side is kind of being cooked in the oven. Okay, so I finally chopped my shallots, so they're all ready to go in the pan. The sage, I've ripped off the leaves off the sage, and now we're going to prepare this. So we're not going to cut all the sage up, we're just going to cut up maybe like half of it. A good tip is to get a little bunch of the sage leaves and roll them together, and then you can get your little vegetable knife and you can just slice through those rolls of leaves, and that'll shred the leaves up finely. I mean, you can cut them with scissors as well, so you'll end up with kind of a bit of a mixture of sort of like full leaves and then sliced up and cut leaves. Then we're going to go over to our pan. And I would say about 2 tablespoons of olive oil in the pan. Put your shallots in. And you can add your sage now. To cook those now till they reduce down and they soften. So you can see now that the butternut squash is starting to cook. It's been in there round about sort of like 15-20 minutes, so just give it a quick turn over so you kind of get in all the sides roasted. Turn it over, and then you can pop that back in the oven again to roast for the remaining time, which is around about 15 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to make the stock for the risotto. So boil a kettle of water, and you want roughly around about 700 millilitres of hot water. To this you're going to add one of these stock pots, or alternatively you could use some sort of like bouillon like we've got here, probably about 4 teaspoons of bouillon to this quantity of hot water. You got a spoon there, Di?
I have.
Cool. So drop it in, make sure you don't splash yourself, and then get in your wooden spoon. Start to stir that. Now this is actually going to go back onto the heat, so we're going to use a separate pan now. So we're going to pour the stock into the pan, and if that stock pot hasn't quite dissolved yet, it will do once it's in the pan and we've started boiling. So this can now go back. This can go onto the hob now, and keep stirring it until that stock cube or your bouillon is beginning to dissolve. I've got my onions here as well. So as you can see now, the onion is really starting to soften now and go translucent, and the sage is now starting to soften. Also, you can use, if you don't have fresh sage available, you can use dried sage, and I'd probably say about 1 teaspoon to 1.5 teaspoons of sage that you can add to your onions before you start cooking them. Okay, so put that back on the hob. We're going to keep that nice and warm, and now it's time to put in your risotto rice, and then give that a lovely stir, coating it with the oil and all the sort of like onion juices that are in the pan. So you want to cook this until the rice starts to go translucent, and keep it on a medium heat, and really keep your eye on this. The main thing with risotto is that you keep watching the risotto now and stirring it. You'll notice that the rice will start to go translucent after around about 3 to 5 minutes. So just keep your eye on it and keep stirring it around. And then you've got your stock here on the side that's also simmering. Okay, so my butternut squash is nice and roasted now. So I'm just setting that aside and then going back to the butternut squash seeds that we had inside the butternut squash. I've given these a bit of a rinse just to get rid of the flesh. And then I'm just going to put them on a bit of paper towel and just pat them so they go nice and dry. And then I've prepared a baking tray, or you can use the baking tray that you had your butternut squash on. I've put a little bit of parchment paper on there, and I'm now going to sprinkle the seeds off the paper. Getting them all off on there. Precious little commodity. So they're all in the baking tray. And then just space them out. And while your oven's still hot, you can pop those into the oven, and probably around about sort of like 20-25 minutes they should be done. The risotto rice now is starting to go translucent. And you can see now what the risotto rice is looking like. So it's starting to kind of just begin to start going clear. So the key to making a good risotto is to be patient. What you need to do is to keep your eye on the pan and kind of keep stirring the risotto rice as you're adding the stock. Let the risotto rice take in the stock and start to drink up all that juice. And then when you can see that the rice is starting to begin to dry out a little bit, you need to keep adding the stock there. So I'm just going to add another ladleful. And it's best to do it just like one ladleful at a time, just to kind of like keep the risotto cooking. Okay, so you can see now how the risotto rice is starting to absorb all those lovely liquids. So just keep on persevering. So again, just keep ladling in your stock. Returning the pan to the heat. Keeping your stock warm as well beside it. Okay, so now the risotto rice has absorbed all that lovely stock, and it's now this lovely rich consistency you can see. You can try now like tasting a little bit of it on a spoon, and just to make sure that the rice is cooked all the way through. This is a really good time now to add a little bit of Parmesan cheese in there, saving a bit aside to sprinkle on top. And now you can start to add in your butternut squash. So you can start adding that into the pan. It's a good tip to add it at this point so that the butternut squash doesn't continue cooking and become kind of mashed potato basically. So you can then start to fold in the butternut squash in with the risotto rice, and just keep adding till all your squash is in with your risotto rice. So the butternut squash seeds they've been roasted, they've been in the oven for around about half an hour. So they're nice and sort of toasty. And these are great. You can kind of like put them on salad, or you can just have them as like a little snack. You can add a little bit of sea salt to them. Just mix it in, and even like a little grind of pepper, so they're nice and very lovely. Just kind of like just to have as a little snack, or just sprinkle on your salad. So as you can see, the risotto's fully cooked now. So you can spoon it into bowls, and there's probably enough here to around about 4 people, I would say. So Nice big hearty helping there. You can sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan on top. I even like putting the butternut squash seed, like a little sprinkling of those on the top. Adds another texture. And so there you go.
All right, so we're going to start to make our biscottis, and we're going to use 250 grams of self-raising flour. That's half of this, a bag this size. We've got 150 grams of caster sugar, 50 grams of nuts, mixed nuts. I'm using almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, but just feel free to use whatever nuts you might have hanging around, or whichever your particular favourite. We've got 90 grams of butter here as well, and a teaspoonful of sea salt. You can add cocoa powder if you want to sort of chocolatey up the biscottis, but personally I just like them plain with the nuts in. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to add the flour to my mixing bowl. As I said, it's half of this bag. I've already made one batch, so I'm not going to weigh up this because this is going to be exactly 250 grams, which is the other half of the bag. To that, I'm going to add my teaspoonful of sea salt, my caster sugar, and my butter. And at this point, I'm just going to work it all through with my hands until it becomes kind of like breadcrumbs. At that point, that's when I'm going to add my nuts and my eggs. Okay, so I've been rubbing these ingredients together for a few minutes now, and this is kind of like the consistency that we want. One little tip is if you take the butter out of the fridge in advance, it makes this part of the procedure so much easier. Right, at this stage I'm going to add my egg. Now, use 1 large egg or 2 small eggs. And then just bind this all together. You can start this bit off with a spoon or something if you don't want to get your hands in, but eventually you're going to have to get your hands in. Okay, so I've been working the dough together for a while and I've got it to this stage. This is when I'm going to add my chopped nuts. Well, called chopped nuts, they're actually bashed. What I did is I put them in between, the whole nuts, in between the sheets of a clean tea towel, and then I just bashed them with the rolling pin. And so you get lots of different sizes and shapes, and I think that works really well with this recipe. So now I'm going to just work all of the nuts into my dough mixture. And in a minute, I'm going to form this into 2, I suppose, sausage shapes, and I'm going to put them onto my baking sheet ready to go into the oven for the first bake. Alright, so I've formed my dough into these 2 roughly the same size kind of flat sausage shapes here, and they're ready to go into the oven at 175 for the first stage of the 2-part baking, and these will go in for about 25 minutes, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, so the biscottis have been in the oven now for about 25 minutes on at 175 degrees. So that's the first bake. I'm going to get them out now. Oh, they smell amazing. Right, and I'm just going to leave these here to cool, and then I'm going to slice them up, pop them back in the oven for the second bake, and that's what makes them biscottis. Right, so I've cut one of the loaves into little finger-shaped sizes, and if you cut it on the angle a little bit like that, it's just a little bit more fancy. These ends don't tend to fit on the tray once we've turned them all over, so being as they're already baked, you can have a little taste of those before you pop this in for the second bake, which turns them into a much crispier and harder biscuit type thing. As you can see at the moment, it's quite cakey and a little bit crumbly, so be a little bit delicate with it. But once these are all done. I'm going to put it back in the oven for about 7 minutes. I'm going to check them at 7 minutes and see if they're ready to come out.
Okay, it's okay.
Looking forward to this. Oh, Kevin, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's
Really,
nice.
really good.
Well worth the effort. I know it takes a little bit longer to cook, but it's
Definitely.
it's such a nice taste.
I love the sweetness of the butternut squash.
Mm.
Really goes well with the sage.
Yeah. Very good.
Yum. Okay, Kev.
Okay.
I'm going to try the
That's
biscottis.
very nice. Mm. Really nice. Really taste those nuts and pistachios. I love that.
And you just get that aftertaste of salt, don't you, from the sea
Yeah,
salt?
yeah.
What I was thinking is any of these that we don't eat can be stored in a jar like this, and I think it'd make a lovely gift.
Yeah, definitely.
These go so nice with a little espresso, don't they? Chin chin.
Chin chin. Cheers.